Well, hello everyone. It's right at noon. Thank you for joining us here for our next series of Calendar Cooking with Elizabeth. I'm Elizabeth Coots. I am the Woodford County Extension Agent for Family and Consumer Sciences. We are part of the University of Kentucky Cooperative Extension Service, and this is the second of our monthly Calendar Cooking Facebook Live videos that are featuring the recipe of the month in our 2021 food and nutrition calendar, as you see here. If you don't yet have a copy of our new 2021 calendars, you can stop by the Woodford County Extension Office to pick one up at 184 Beasley Drive in the County Park. If you are outside of Woodford County, but still in Kentucky, you can contact your local extension office to pick up one of these calendars for yourself. So of course, we are just newly into the month of February. So we are featuring the February recipe, which is Easy Peasy Mac and Cheesy. And I like the name because it starts with easy, something that is quick and easy. And of course, since it's in our food and nutrition calendar, it is a little more nutritious. And especially with this dish, it's mac and cheese, basically with tuna and peas. So it is a little more nutritious than our traditional mac and cheese that's just pasta and cheese. And we'll talk about why that is. But we can, in this recipe, it also makes this dish pretty much a meal with a couple additions that we'll talk about. So the first part of this recipe is the pasta. That's kind of the main part of it. And we're using today, as you can imagine, whole wheat pasta. So that makes this recipe a little bit healthier. And if you aren't sure when you're shopping or if you already have pasta, if the pasta is in fact whole wheat, usually says it right on the front, 100% whole grain pasta. If you're not sure, you can always flip it over to the back and look at the ingredients, and it should say whole wheat or whole grain something, and you know that that is in fact whole grain pasta. Okay, so that's what we're using today. The recipe calls for a 16-ounce box, and I have already cooked the pasta for purposes of this demonstration. And the ingredients call for something maybe that you don't normally do when you cook pasta. It calls to reserve a half a cup of the pasta water. So instead of just draining all that off, you want to reserve some of it. So I have done that here in my liquid measuring cup. I have a half a cup of the pasta water, and the purpose of saving that is for just in case we need it at the end if our cheese sauce, in this recipe, our cheese sauce is a little too thick, if it needs to be thinned down. The pasta water, just with that little bit of starch, just makes the sauce a little bit creamier. So we're just going to set this over here to the side just in case we need it. So I have my pasta here that has drained, and that's just going to sit over to the side until we need it. The next step, so the recipe calls for a 12-ounce can of evaporated milk. So I have that here in a sauce pot. I've already started to heat that up just for purposes of the video, so we don't have to stare at a pot and wait for it to heat up. So it is warming. In the recipe, it doesn't tell you, it'll tell you on your can, but you want to make sure with your evaporated milk that you shake it really well. The milk tends to settle in the bottom, so shake it really well before you use your evaporated milk and put it into your pot. So we're just going to heat this up. I'm going to turn it up just a little bit. We don't want our milk to get too hot because it could scald and stick to the bottom. And if you've ever made something where you have milk on the stove and it heats up and it sticks, that's never fun for anybody. So check on it every now and then. I have it on about not quite a medium heat because I don't want it to get too hot too fast either. I want to just slowly warm it up. I don't want it to boil. I just want it to be very hot. So I think I pretty much have that warmed there. The next step in the recipe is to add our cheese. And the recipe calls for an 8-ounce package of cheddar cheese, but you can use any kind of cheese you'd like. I think it would be really good with a little bit of spice and some pepper jack cheese maybe, or you could do a mixture of cheeses. If that's something that you have at home, you can just add whatever you have at home. So I'm going to turn it up just a little bit because I want this to become a sauce. And it might be kind of hard to see on the video, but I can still see the cheese pieces. I want it to heat up thoroughly so that the cheese melts, and this creates the sauce that we're going to use in our recipe. Of course, you know, cheese on anything is going to be wonderful, but the cheese and the milk, of course, in this recipe, as good as it's going to be, it also is going to add some calcium. So again, that's one reason why this recipe is just a little bit healthier than maybe your typical. And the reason that this recipe calls for evaporated milk, that might not be something that you are used to cooking with in this instance. Of course, evaporated milk is a shelf-stable food in a can, and it can stay in your pantry. It's something that you can have on hand. And as a matter of fact, everything except for the cheese in this recipe is a pantry staple. That's the only addition that you would have to have in this recipe. But the evaporated milk, so that just helps to make this recipe a little bit creamier, and it's actually non-fat milk. So even without the fat, using the evaporated milk is going to make it just a little bit creamier. Okay, so I'm starting to get, all my cheese is melted. Again, I think it's kind of difficult to see here, but it's all melted through, and I'm going to go ahead and add the seasonings. The recipe calls for a tablespoon of celery seed. Add that in. A tablespoon of celery seed, 2 teaspoons of garlic powder, which of course smells really good, a half a teaspoon of salt, and then 1/4 teaspoon of pepper. And really, even though this recipe calls for salt, I kind of think that could be optional. If you are trying to stick with a low sodium diet or watching your salt, that's something that doesn't necessarily have to be added. You could omit that. So I'm going to mix this all the way through here. It looks and smells wonderful. And so something else that you may not have at home is the celery seed. And if you don't have that, you can omit it. You don't have to have that to make this recipe. It just adds a little bit different of a flavor that maybe we're not used to. Okay, so this is nice and hot and melty, and I am going to add the next ingredient, which is a small can of tuna. And this is tuna in water, and it says it right on the package, solid white tuna in water. I've already drained it, of course. You can also buy tuna in oil, but of course that is gonna have a lot more fat in it than the tuna with water. And you're really not sacrificing any of the flavor, especially in this recipe, by using that tuna with water. So I'm gonna kind of break up the tuna in here a little bit. And of course, the tuna in a can is already cooked. We don't have to worry about that. You can use any type of meat actually in place of tuna. If you had some leftover chicken, maybe you could dice that up and add it in here. Just make sure that whatever meat you do use, that it's already cooked when you're adding it to your sauce here. Okay, so that is nice and mixed thoroughly. The next step is to add a can of peas. And these are, the recipe says low sodium peas, but the can says no salt added. So salt, sodium, same thing in this instance. If you're not sure, or if the front of your can does not specify if there's salt in it or not, of course, you can always flip it over on the back. And I recommend doing that, even if that maybe isn't something that you typically do. If you just, go, especially in the canned aisle, just go and grab what you normally grab to put in your pantry, turn it over and look at the ingredients. You might be surprised, if you buy a can of diced tomatoes, for example, oftentimes there's flavorings or seasonings that are added in there. So maybe take a look at next time you're shopping and see what ingredients are actually in the food that you're buying. So the ingredients in this can of peas, it says green peas and water. So I know, even though it says it on the front, I know from looking at the ingredients that there's no salt in these peas. So I'm going to add this in. And you can also use, in place of the canned peas, you could use frozen peas. And if you did use frozen peas, you would want to make sure to just cook it in the sauce just a little bit longer, because you want to make sure that those peas are thawed and heated through. And you could use any different type of vegetable. I feel like, you know, I'm cooking the recipe on these videos, but when I'm at home, I am changing it to whatever I have in the pantry, but then also whatever my family likes, what we prefer. I think it would be, this recipe would be really good with maybe some carrots in it, or maybe a can or frozen mixed vegetables in it. I'm always looking to add something to it and just change it up. That's what is fun about cooking, is taking recipes, even a recipe as simple as this, and changing it to making it what you like, make it your own recipe. So I encourage you to do that at home, even though, like I said, for these videos, I am following the recipe usually to a T. So our next step is to take our pasta and mix it all together. And if you have a larger pot, you would want to use that to mix everything together. I am going to mix it in this bowl though, so that you can see. So I'm going to go ahead and add my pasta in here. Of course, it's been sitting a little bit, so it is a little clumped together, but that's okay. Add all that in. That over there. And then we are just going to mix everything together. The last step is always the easiest, right? Just mix everything together right on top here. And it is filling up my bowl here. And it looks delicious. So I'm just going to mix this thoroughly. The recipe does call for you to mix this in the pot, but like I said, you know, if you're going to do that, make sure that your pot is large enough to hold the pasta, because it's quite a bit. In this recipe. It's a 16-ounce box. Okay, so just mixing it thoroughly here. And really, that is it. That's the recipe. It's very easy, as the name entails, easy peasy. Now, one thing that the calendar also includes, if you're familiar, you probably know this, but it gives a suggestion over on the side about how to make this a meal. So for this particular recipe, and I have it here, I'm going to plate it up so you can see, but it suggests a side salad and some low-fat milk. So I'm just going to add my pasta here on the side with my tuna and my peas, and there I have lunch. It's lunchtime and I'm hungry, and this is a wonderful, nutritious meal. Something else that the calendar has, just to share with you all, each month it has a physical activity tip. And it also has information on how to be active. It includes lots of other information, all of the nutrition facts for each recipe, as well as the cost per recipe. So this recipe, the entire recipe costs $6.41. So that is a pretty inexpensive recipe. That's something that maybe you don't think about, how much the whole recipe costs. So I encourage you to come to the Woodford County Extension Office and pick up a calendar, or you, like I said earlier, you can contact your local extension office to pick up a calendar. If you want the recipe right now, we will post it in the description of this video. And if you have any questions about the recipe or anything else, feel free to contact me. Again, I'm Elizabeth Coots, the Family and Consumer Sciences Extension Agent here in Woodford County. And with that, we will see you all right back here on the Woodford County Extension Office page the first Wednesday of March for the next recipe. Take care.